16th meeting. Can we have roll call, please?
Mr. Arndt.
Present.
Mr. Dana.
Here.
Ms. Fisher.
Here.
Mrs. Metzler.
Here.
And Mrs. Ortiz.
Present. Are we in compliance?
Yes, we are.
Will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any correspondence?
I have none.
I have one thing to share with the board. Unfortunately, received email correspondence from the Auditor of State's Office denying an extension request for the filing of our 2020 annual financial report. Now, our GAP provider, Lennon and Company, had requested that we seek an extension due to some extraordinary circumstances that they faced. Last year, we were granted an extension because he had undergone a life-threatening illness, and he got an extension. Now, this year, he's been trying to adjust to medications and some other things, including an automatic extension granted fiscal year December clients, pushed them back and made it harder to work on the June 30th ending clients. But the auditor would not grant the request. So that means we will be filing our report late, and it should be filed by the end of this month. He's still, our GAP preparer, Lennon, is continuing to pursue this extension because he had other clients that were approved, but the auditor decided that he's approved too many and he's not going to approve anymore. This was relayed in an email, and it's kind of inconsistent and arbitrary. So he's still pursuing that, but as of right now, since we were denied, then our report is late and it'll be filed soon. But I just needed to inform you that.
Thank you. Agenda modifications?
We have none.
That's the first.
That brings us to our first hearing of the public. If there's something you'd like to say, we need you to come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. Okay. Have a motion for approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Arndt?
Yes.
Mr. Dana?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
And Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes. The treasurer's financial report?
I move to accept.
You need a motion?
Yes, please.
Move.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Dana?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes.
And Mr. Arndt?
Yes.
A motion to approve the invoices?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes.
Mr. Arndt?
Yes.
And Mr. Dana?
Yes.
That brings us to the informational items.
You have the investment report. You can see that we're reporting 2 donations, one to the high school from the Kendall Foundation that is being used to purchase, or has already been used to purchase, 45 webcams for the high school classrooms to aid in virtual learning. And then 25 cases of Utz potato chips valued at $450 from Robert and Melanie Augustinsky, former Geneva High School graduates, to the Geneva Schools Food Service Program for distribution with the bag lunches. They had made a number of donations in the spring and are continuing that now.
That's very nice of them. The legislative report?
Yes. Governor DeWine signed into law House Bill 404 that will extend the ability of public bodies, including boards of education, to hold and attend meetings or hearings via electronic technology. This was originally set to expire on December 1st, but it has now been extended until July 1st of next year. The bill also includes education provisions like an exemption for districts from penalties for not administering to a student the fall administration of any diagnostic assessment, kindergarten readiness assessment, or third grade English language arts assessment if certain conditions are met. It also provides flexibility and exemptions regarding state-required health screenings for kindergartners and first graders. For the 2021 school year, it prohibits the use of student growth measures and evaluations. It allows a Board of Education to determine if evaluations are impossible or impractical, and extends license and certificate deadlines to July 1st of 2021. Additionally, the bill extends the summer food service program regulations until July 1st of next year, and extends to the 21-22 school year a prohibition against using value-added data for teacher, principal, and counselor performance evaluations. The governor also signed into law Senate Bill 89, which we talked about last month, a bill that changes the student eligibility criteria for the Ed Choice Voucher Program. We've talked about this a lot, but as a reminder, the new criteria requires two factors in order for a student to be eligible. First, the school building must be in the lowest 20% of buildings based upon the performance index rankings for the 17-18 and 18-19 school years. Second, the school building is operated by a school district that has an enrollment of at least 20% Title I eligible students. Based upon those two factors, the number of school buildings for performance-based vouchers that will be eligible for the 21-22 school year would be about 473, which is down from 1,227 in fiscal year 21. The bill also increases the poverty threshold from 200% to 250% for the income-based voucher program eligibility. In addition, the bill revises the law regarding career technical education and joint vocational school districts and amends the student degree completion at state institutions of higher education. The lawmakers also approved House Bill 123 and sent it to the governor, which requires public schools to implement certain programs on and provide instruction in suicide awareness and prevention and violence prevention. It also provides $2.5 million in payments to dropout prevention and recovery e-schools that meet certain standards. On December 3rd, the House passed House Bill 305, the Fair School Funding Plan. The bill creates a new school funding formula. We've talked about this quite a bit as well. The House Finance Committee amended the bill on December 1st to make several changes, including transportation modifications and revamping the makeup of the School Funding Oversight Commission to now include 3 school board members. The bill has moved to the Senate. Meanwhile, a hearing on Senate Bill 376, the Senate's companion bill to House Bill 305, took place on 12/1 in the Senate Finance Committee as panelists heard testimony from the Cupp-Patterson work group members. As of this morning, the next Senate Finance Committee meeting has not been scheduled. The House passed a number of bills leading up to the break, including, there's many, but I'm going to just name off a few, and all of these are being sent to the Senate. House Bill 310, which revises the school discipline, bullying, and hazing policies at public schools and colleges. House Bill 367, which requires the state to recommend a job description for school counselors and requires the public schools to consider those recommendations when preparing job descriptions and assigning duties for the counselors, and requires the designation of a school counselor liaison at the Ohio Department of Education. And House Bill 409, which modifies student attendance requirements at certain e-schools. The Senate passed Senate Bill 372, which creates the Holocaust and Genocide Memorial and Education Commission that, among other responsibilities, would find opportunities to provide resources for schools to effectively teach about the Holocaust and genocide. The Senate Education Committee was busy holding hearings as well. House Bill 436, which requires professional development for screening and intervention for children with dyslexia. Senate Bill 292, which establishes student attendance requirements at e-schools that are not dropout prevention or recovery schools. Senate Bill 342, which requires students who enter the 9th grade for the first time on or after July 1st of next year to earn at least 1/2 unit of instruction in the study of financial literacy. Senate Bill 350, which prohibits school districts from providing transit passes for public transportation to students enrolled in grades K through 8 in the 2021 school year. And Senate Bill 388, which was introduced just earlier this month, they've already had the hearing on, which provides flexibility to school districts regarding educational requirements of substitute teachers in the 2021 school year. They also accepted a substitute version and passed Senate Bill 358, which changes education law for this school year, 2021, to provide school districts continued flexibility and relief during the pandemic. The substitute version of the bill removes provisions that were enacted in other recently passed legislation. The House Primary and Secondary Committee held hearings and testimony, and this is the most amount of work I think I've seen them post this entire year as I'm looking at the legislative information. It was just incredible. So these are just a snapshot of some of the things that they did, and by no means was this all the work, but they did it all in like 3 weeks. So that House Primary and Secondary Committee held the hearing and testimony on House Bill 459, which prohibits a coach, director, or supervisor in an extracurricular activity from restricting student participation in other extracurricular activities. House Bill 494, which establishes a loan repayment program for eligible teachers. House Bill 529, which requires one-time performance audits of school districts with current academic distress commission. House Bill 549, which amends the operation, management, and accountability of community schools. House Bill 756, which permits school districts to employ state-licensed substitute teachers in the 2021 school year in accordance with their own set of educational requirements. And House Bill 758, which requires school districts to permit family member spectators at athletic events. The House Criminal Justice Committee held a fourth hearing on House Bill 83, and that's the one that increases the penalties for the offense of failing to stop for a stopped school bus. And in new bills brought forth this month, there were two that were kind of the same, House Bill 789 and 791, both looking to extend the authority for school boards and other groups to hold their meetings electronically. That was already addressed in House Bill 404 that the governor signed. And then finally, House Bill 793 to extend certain state license deadlines and allow licenses to remain valid until December 1st of 2021. So I'm sorry that was a long one, but I think they did a lot of work. So, and all of those were things that I had touched upon throughout the year that they were finally getting around to. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could piggyback onto Mrs. Metzler's report, that was a big win for the Fair School Funding Plan to be voted out of committee, the House Finance Committee, by a 32-0 vote, and then to have a floor vote of 87-9 out of that full House. It was hoped that that would put pressure on the Senate, but it obviously is not going to happen before the end of the year. You know, and the hope was that it would be put into place while John Patterson was still, before he was term limited out. There's no reason that the Senate Finance Committee and the Senate couldn't have done it. They've made plenty of excuses. You know, some may be legitimate. They said they didn't have enough time to hear it out, but that's because they delayed. The Senate Bill 376 was introduced so that it could receive concurrent testimony at the same time that substitute House Bill 305 was in play. I think what it really boils down to, and it to me is very sad for Ohio's school children, is politics. We know that the incoming Senate president, change in leadership, Matt Huffman from the Lima area, is pro-school choice. And he's been known to say that he has his own funding plan that he plans on introducing, which is kind of odd because the whole budget process starts with the governor and then it goes to the House. So there's already something in play before it goes to the Senate for discussion, but he plans on introducing his own funding plan, but nobody knows what that's about, but we're pretty sure it's not going to be favorable to traditional public schools. It would appear that those people that want to hold on to their committee chair positions or have positions of authority in during his term as Senate president were unwilling to move things forward because they didn't want to upset him and possibly have him give their chairmanship to some other person. So it's not done. The plan is that it will be introduced as soon as the session resumes in January by the House, probably as House Bill 1. And they think that that will pass, just like substitute House Bill 305 passed. And they're also working with the governor to see if he will include the Fair School Funding Plan in his budget that he turns over to the House. Now, we don't know whether that'll happen or not, but one way or the other, if not there, then the House will be putting it into their plan, and then it will go through the hearings. You know, the problem is when it was a standalone bill, it had hearings and people could focus on that. In the budget process, there is so much going on, and that's one of the reasons why we've never got a constitutional funding plan out of the General Assembly during the budget process, because they don't have time to give it its fair due and then to fund it. If this fair school funding plan is in place, then all they have to worry about is the funding piece and not try to debate what is the best way to fund schools for that particular budget year. They have would have a formula in place, and they just have to apply the funding mechanism to that. So, not going to be done this year, but it's not dead yet.
Thank you. That brings us to the ATEC report.
Yes, this is the end of the first semester, and ATEC is a little bit different in that they have a lot of interaction with students and parents in order to get their student body. And with the COVID restrictions, it has become a rather difficult situation out there, so they have been using some over and above means to do this. Their career night, they will hold a live online session from 5 to 7 on Thursday. They'll talk about their programs and use some pre-recorded interviews. Will be a live presentation, will be on their website and on Facebook, and it should be posted in a couple of days. The students will also be able to schedule a personal tour through that program. Then there's going to be an interactive presentation where they've created an online PowerPoint that students and parents can sign on with a Google account, and they will receive a copy of any answers and responses to questions that they may have and considerations that they may have. All of the students in Ashtabula County have a Google account through their schools, so they will be able to log on to this. And also they are hiring out, getting some promotional videos done. And since they are unable to host normal visits, they're producing a clip for each program. The crew will be here on Wednesday and Thursday, and the videos will be very useful this year, and they'll also be able to use them for presentations for the next few years on their website, where they detail just exactly what their programs are and what they involve. So things are moving along, and adjustments are being made. That's it.
Thank you. That brings us to the report of the superintendent and the Geneva Pride positives.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Ortiz. As I share the Geneva Pride positives, as I've mentioned in other meetings, the positives have less activities and events that we can report out on, but that doesn't take away from the creativity that's being shown in the buildings, the caring, the sharing, the generosity of our students, teachers, staff, and parents during this holiday season. So please take special note of all of those special moments that our staff and students and parents are sharing. At Osterberg, Cork, and Geneva, Platt, Spencer, here's a list of some of the activities that each building has participated in over the past month. Letters to Santa with the Gazette newspaper, Toys for Tots donations, a remote Spirit Week, which they held this week with Elf Day, Ugly Sweater or Mask, and other events. Weekly crafts for families to complete at home. There was pickup available outside the building for the materials that were needed. An online Santa shop, remote learning materials, food and gifts being delivered by teachers and staff to students' homes. SNAs have been Zooming with students along with the regular education teachers. All requests for hotspots and the Chromebooks have been filled and granted at the elementary level. Our local daycares have been working remotely with our students, making sure that the students are online, Zooming lessons and submitting work. And for all 3 elementary buildings, Mrs. Stowell is in the process of posting collage videos of the students singing holiday songs. The videos will be posted on Google Classroom, PTO Facebook pages, and the district website. Just a little holiday cheer shared by our elementary students. At Geneva Middle School, after an unexpected accident and the loss of a family member, the staff at Geneva Middle School was able to collect over $750 to help 2 of our students' families. We also were able to collaborate with Geneva Safety Forces, who are helping families during this holiday season. Geneva Middle School has continued some of our services during our remote learning, such as handing out winter wear from their Eagles Closet as needed, and Friday food distributions. Thank you to Helping Hands and the Geneva Businesswomen for continuing to support our efforts to help students. And also at Geneva Middle School, they are in the midst of the Winter Spirit Week. Since we are unable to hold our annual hallway door decorating contest and reindeer games, students are participating in various dress-up activities from home in an effort to remain festive during such a challenging time. Thank you to all of our staff and students for participating this week. And at Geneva High School, the Interact Club at GHS, along with help from the AP students and the Rotary Club of Geneva, are working on a community service project to write and deliver Christmas cards to all the residents and workers at every nursing home in Geneva. The Interact Club wanted to reach out to all residents in the nursing homes because it has been such a difficult year for them, not being able to see families, having limited visitors, and at times no visitors at all. The club also wanted to recognize the workers and thank them for all they have done and will continue to do during this time. In total, they will have written and delivered about 600 cards with the hope of spreading some holiday cheer in the Geneva community. The Interact Club would like to say thank you to everyone who volunteered and participated in this project to make such a great success. And finally, for a final project in creative writing, seniors Amy Bryan, Isabella Cordova, and Tessa Jones wrote a holiday story for children titled A Quarantine Christmas. With the help of fantastic illustrations by senior Tony Fidel, the girls created quite a special book with a very timely and important message. To share this message, they will be reading their story to various elementary classes via Zoom this week. And I do have a copy of their story here at the table that if you'd like to take a look here at the end of the meeting, it is available. And I just wanted to end on behalf of the administration, teachers, and staff. We'd like to wish a happy holiday season and a safe holiday season to all of our students, families, and members of the community. So best wishes in 2021.
Thank you. I recommend a motion to accept the following new revised and replacement policies for board adoption. The policy numbers are listed.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Yes. I have issues with 2270 concerning religion and the verbiage in it. Policy 2431, athletics, which it says that must maintain a 1.5 grade point average. Is that a D? Is that a C? 1.5 seems pretty low to me. I have issues with 5200 on attendance. If you read it, requires continuity of instruction. We have another paper here today that tells us the amount of students that we haven't been able to contact or have been absent. It's just the way it's worded. I don't know how much control we have over it. I have an issue with 5610 on suspension. I don't believe that we're a court. We're certainly not a Supreme Court, and some of the verbiage concerning suspension, due process, whether a student gets expelled, suspended, district administrators shall use a preponderance of evidence standard. Come on. I'm in 10th grade. I'm disruptive in a classroom, and Mr. Markajon pulls me in. My parents would say, you know what, Mr. Markajon has full authority to send my rear end home. At what point do we hold people accountable? It's like we're coming up with policies and rules that protect a disruptive student. So I can't go along with that. But I'm just one person. Then 5611, again, due process, the same thing. I don't have a 6152, and the 5517.02, the entire policy, I believe we said last time that there was a new one taking its place, but I don't think that I have the new one. 551702.
That was the one that was deleted.
On sexual violence, but it's
Yes.
on the new agenda. It's on last board's agenda, and it's on this agenda.
Because we would have to approve that one is deleted as one of our policies.
Okay. And 8800 concerning religion, I find it, I don't know. Who sets the standard? Does the state school board? Does the federal law? Does the state law? Who says who can do what and when? I mean, I hear stories of people forcing political agendas in the classroom, but then a religious agenda. And just the verbiage when you read it, you can't advance or, let me find it here. You can't do one or you can't do the other. So I can't deny a student from saying something about a certain religion, but the paid professional that we pay to be in the classroom can't give a personal opinion about something. Even though we allow them to give personal opinions on everything else, we entrust our children with them. So those policies, I can't agree with the verbiage that's in them. And I can't believe that. That's my question goes back to, where do these policies come from? Do we cut and paste from the state and say this is the way we're going to do business, or is this something that all local school boards get together and they agree with this verbiage? Or is this the way the law is written and that's why we have to do that?
This is the way that Ohio law is written. Most of these reflect any changes that have occurred in Ohio law. We have a law firm that then goes through Ohio law, looks at what changes have been implemented, and then Neola receives that information from those attorneys, and they write the policy so that it reflects any of the changes that are current in Ohio law or federal law, so that our policies are up to date. The policies that you talked about, policy 2270, that policy reflects the current Ohio law. There was the Ohio Student Religious Liberties Act of 2019, which made some changes, which allowed students to not only complete homework or artwork or other types of academic materials and show religious components of that, and it would have to be graded on the same criteria that any of the work was graded. That basically was the change of that policy. The other one that you referenced, and I may not go in exact order, the interscholastic athletic policy, that also reflects current Ohio law. I did make one change in that, and I did put a new copy in your packet. We added a little bit of verbiage to that because usually our trainer assesses students if there was a concussion or protocol that needs to be followed for that student returning to action. So I did add the word trainer in there. The 1.5 is set by us. That has not changed from what we had before. The only change that we made to that policy is that we would allow a student, if they did have a failing grade, one failing grade, and it's still maintained above the 1.5, then they could be involved still in the interscholastic athletics. But that has not changed from our previous policy.
So what is a 1.5?
D plus.
A D plus. Okay, and then on one of the changes that you told us about that's highlighted in yellow on B, I think it's the third page. It says a medical review panel. Who's the medical review panel? Is that a board from UH or from Cleveland Clinic?
It could be, and really we don't determine that, but if a student had a pre-existing condition that may hinder them to play a sport, whoever that physician would be, if there's a panel of experts from UH, ACMC, Cleveland Clinic, whoever it may be, they would determine if that student would be eligible to play with that condition. So that would be determined by the medical facility.
Okay.
The other ones that you referenced, the attendance policy, again, those adoptions were recommended for consideration, mainly based on having language in there to track remote attendance. And they changed so that there was a revised definition for a medical excuse also as part of that policy. And the biggest, again, change was for distance learning, because we did not have anything in policy before that regarded any remote or distance learning, how that would be accounted. The 5610 and 5611, which are suspension, expulsion, and due process, those were recommendations from Neola and the legal counsel. There's two different standards. It was recommended that we use the preponderance standard, which the burden of proof is met when there's greater than 50% chance that the claim is true. So again, for a school district, it's better for us that we take everything that's presented to us, as long as there's at least 50% of the evidence, we can say that that discipline would be appropriate for that action, as long as there's enough discipline, at least 50% or greater, that we can say we made our decision based on that. That was the recommendation from the legal counsel and through Neola. The policy 8450.01, oh, that wasn't one you brought up, I'm sorry. And the last one was the 8800, again, the religious patriotic ceremonies and observances. We've had this policy in place. The only change in that policy, again, there was language put in there about the student's rights for a student that engages in religious expression before, during, or after school in the same manner or same extent that a student is permitted to engage in other secular activities or expressions. That was the only addition to that. This policy also names the various observances that we have during a school year, but that was the only change, and that goes back to that Ohio Student Religious Liberties Act of 2019, which was part of Ohio law, and Ohio Revised Code 3320.03. So those are the reasons for those changes. Again, a lot of them reflect any law changes, and that's where the policy then is written through the legal counsel.
Okay, back to 2270.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I would say the first major paragraph, the last line. It says, the board directs that professional staff members employing such materials be neutral in their approach and avoid using them to advance or inhibit. Now, advancing something is okay, the individual that's in charge of the classroom is not allowed to support one above the other. But how do you inhibit a young person when they want to come right out and talk about a specific religion? Because it also says in here on one of these that we are to teach the world religions. So when you get a student that feels strongly about one, how are they to inhibit that student from talking about that religion? It's easy for us to do it to the teacher because the teacher, we pay their paycheck, or the citizens pay their paycheck. Are they just going to change the subject, tell the student, cut it? When you put advance or inhibit in the same thing, that's a large task, especially something that is personal like religion.
And that's been part of our policy. That has been in there that, again, when our professional staff is dealing with religion that is very personal to each individual, that they should not be promoting any religion or inhibiting any religion discussion. If they're having that discussion in class, they should be covering it fully as they can, in all viewpoints, allowing all viewpoints to be shared. Again, that was not a change in this policy. That's something that we've had. The only change was the portion that's in green as part of that policy, which was part of the new law. But again, religion becomes a very difficult topic for our teachers, as students can freely express their thoughts and feelings towards religion. Again, we're not there to promote any religion, nor are we there to not allow students to share maybe their religious beliefs or what they feel, but again, doing it in a way that everybody understands that everybody has different feelings and different thoughts about religion and allowing those expressions.
I will just state here, and that is, Rick, I understand your concerns, but this is why the legislation that's passed in Columbus, matters. I think we started this meeting when we had our legislative report, and we had our treasurer mention about, hey, sometimes, politics comes into play, with respect to laws that are enacted. And those laws are enacted, and then they filter to us, and to make the policies based on that law. And I agree with you. I mean, if you're a teacher in the classroom, what do you do here on this? I get it. And the reality of it here is we do have a lot of politicians in Columbus that probably have never taught, never been in a situation where they have to provide instruction here to students, and I don't think they have a full understanding of just how difficult of a job our teachers and administrators and staff have. But at the end of the day, when these laws are enacted, we have a duty here from which to follow those. We may not like it, but we all take that oath here from which to support the Constitution and the laws of the state of Ohio, and these are the acts that have been passed in the past year or so. And so because of that, Neola reviews these laws. That's our attorney who reviews these and makes recommendations as far as what our policies should be. And what I'll mention here also is concerns that were raised here about due process, about giving our children the opportunity to appeal from suspensions. I will just note that this isn't a criminal standard. This isn't that we have the duty from which to prove that there was wrongdoing beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not a criminal standard. It's a civil standard of a preponderance of the evidence, so basically 50.1%. So, I think that's done to make sure that there is due process for these students, that they do have the right to a full hearing, but it does set forth a very low bar as far as what that standard of review is. And I will just say I share some of your concerns here with these policies, but at the same time, I remember sitting here and hearing about some of this legislation being enacted, and we all scratched our head and said, how are we going to follow this? And at the end of the day, this is what we're stuck with.
Well, my concern is how much, say, other than going to an election office, does any single one or group of our parents have in these policies? They have no say.
So
These
Rick,
policies are dictated and sent down to us, and we have to follow them because they're mandated to us, whether we agree with them or not.
and let me just say, again, I don't like it. I don't like the school funding situation here where we pass a levy and we say to the citizens here, hey, we want you to pass this levy that's going to go for funding of your local schools, and then we have charter schools that come in, or voucher schools, and your local taxpayer money is going outside of the district. I don't like that either. I mean, I don't like that either, but that's the reality here of the situation. And I understand your frustration, but how many years have we been talking about this, about how our citizens aren't involved in the political process? It's very easy here from which to come to a meeting here of a school board and say, hey, I don't like what you did here with this particular decision that you've made. It's very hard to go down to Columbus and make that same argument to say, hey, I don't like what the law is that you're creating down in Columbus. It's hard. And I mean, I have to give total credit here to Mr. Lillie, who, the time that he has spent here on House Bill 305 to travel down at his own expense from which to pass a fair school funding formula here that would only benefit here rural schools, and we're at the risk here of maybe having to wait another generation before that gets fixed. But it's the rare, I hate to say this, in today's society, it's the rare occasion here where someone wants to learn all that needs to be done here or learned here with respect to these various policies and procedures, and then go down to Columbus and fight like heck for what's right. And that's the world we live in. And Kevin, thank you. I hope your efforts were not in vain.
I have a couple questions if we're still taking them. Okay, so I had questions on 6325 and 6424. So on 6325, my question is, there's an area in here, and let me see if I can find it. I believe it's on page 2 and 3, where it talks about adequate number of sources from which to accept bids, as opposed to a set number. So who determines the adequate number of sources? I did read about whether, if there's a case where there's one bid, then that would be adequate because you couldn't get any more bids. But if there's multiple bids, where does the decision come from? What's adequate?
I'm sorry, which page were you on?
It's at the bottom of page 2.
Okay.
And the top of page 3. It references it a couple times. So under procurement methods, B, small purchases, toward the end of that little paragraph, the adequate number of qualified sources is X'd. And then if you go up to the next page, when sealed bids are used, the following requirements apply: an adequate number of qualified suppliers providing. So I'm just wondering how we determine adequate and who does that.
And often when we're receiving bids or we go out, we're finding it more difficult sometimes to get a certain number of bids for some of the services or goods that we're looking to purchase. Before, where we may have wanted to get multiple bids for something, we may only get 2. So it may be something that we look at, that's adequate, at least we have something to compare. Sometimes we may not even get multiple bids for some of the projects and things that we have out. So again, trying to determine, this was again a recommendation from the policy writers that if you have a certain number in there, then you're going to be required to try to meet that number. If you put in an adequate number, then as a district, you can decide if you're happy with having 2, and that's all you can gather. And if it's a service that you might need, you may not be able to get numerous bids to actually look at for a certain project. So again, we always try to get as many comparisons as we can, especially when we're looking at something that's costly and something that we want to determine, are we getting the best price?
And Amber, in a bidding situation, the board always has the right to reject all bids and have us go out to bid again. I mean, sometimes that might not be productive if we're just in a situation where we can't, as Mr. Kujala said, get any more than that single bid. The number of bids that you get, kind of geographic by location, a lot easier in Cleveland, Akron, than it might be in Ashtabula County or down in Meigs County or something like that, but.
Well, and I suppose if ultimately it comes back to us and we're looking at these bids, or we're looking at one bid and we're uncomfortable with just the one bid, I mean, at least we get the backstory at that point for you to tell us, okay, well, we put this out for 30 days and we only got one bid, or, I mean, I guess that's good. I think that's a very broad word and statement to use. Although I understand what you're saying and under what circumstances it would happen, it's just pretty broad.
So,
But
and you're right. I mean, it does ultimately, come to us here. So the example of this is that we had even recently was when we sent out bids for buses. And when I started on the board, you might get 5 or 6 companies that would bid or would offer bids here for buses. And I think the last time we had this, we had 2. And the reason for that here is you have consolidation that has occurred here with respect to the bus companies here. So we used to have, International, Bluebird, there were a lot of different companies that supplied buses, and through consolidation, you're in a situation where there's like two bus companies. So when you're seeking the bids here, you have a choice of 2. And so when you have, monopoly or an oligarchy here, it is, a limited pool that you have from which to pick. So the decision that we have to make here, and we do have that power, and we have done that before in the past. I know when we've sought some engineering and some work on buildings, where if we didn't think that we had enough in the way of bids to make a decision, we would say bid it out again, see if we got any kind of additional bids. But I think this gives us the freedom here from which to make those decisions and ask those questions. And it's just sort of the reality of knowing that for certain purchases that you make, sometimes there's just not as many bids as what you would like to have. And the buses is a perfect example of that.
and then the question that I had on 6424, the procurement cards, it looked like this was a new policy. So do we use these procurement cards now? Is
We
that
do. We have policy that for like our credit cards, but procurement cards, such as for Lowe's or Home Depot, things that we have that we use at some of those vendors, which is a much easier and quicker way sometimes to go and purchase some of those goods. We did not have a policy in that really defined the details for how those would be handled in the district. So that's why the policy was written, so that there was a policy in place for those cards. They're becoming more common use in many school districts to be able to have, a Home Depot or a Lowe's card or other cards that you can use to go and get some of the items that are necessary in the district in a very quick fashion.
And who uses these cards?
They would be signed out, but our maintenance director, they'll come to the board office to get that card if it's necessary. There's none that have them just on their possession.
Okay.
But they would, if they are going to that particular store, we happen to have a card for that store, they would come to the board office to sign that out and take that card for that particular purchase.
Okay.
So we currently have very limited use of credit cards, so one of the biggest is our Walmart card. So, but in every instance, the person has to get approval from their building principal or department head, approval of the superintendent on that requisition that turns into a purchase order before they get to sign out that card. So it doesn't, skip over the purchasing process. They have to follow the steps. Once the order is approved, then they can sign out that card and go pick it up.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I just have one question.
Sure.
For that same policy. F is just a line.
Yes.
Is that intentional?
Well, you can add if you added an additional
Okay,
reason in there.
okay.
I didn't hear that question. I'm sorry.
On that same policy where it was just, they had F that was just a blank line, that's if we wanted to add something else in there.
And there's nothing
We
there.
did not.
Okay. Thank you. Any additional discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes.
Mr. Arndt?
No.
Mr. Dana?
Yes.
And Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Okay, I recommend the board approve the attached language provided by the district's insurance carrier as a provision for having other individuals in classrooms or buildings during remote instruction.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
The only thing I wanted to mention for this is, when this topic came up, I did contact our insurance company through Ohio School Plan in Highland and posed the question to them. It had been a question that they've heard and said that we would be covered, but did mention, and they actually sent this language to us, did mention that having the board approve this language would be beneficial, so at least that it was in front of the board, and if anything did occur, we already had this approved, but we would be covered if there was an accident or something that occurred and there were family members within that classroom, but this was their recommendation.
One more question, Mr. President. Are animals allowed in the school?
Service animals.
Not a service dog or a pet?
We have pets in the classrooms, some of the teachers do.
For? I mean, so I can bring a dog?
Well, this pet that I'm aware of was a guinea pig, but I don't know about a dog.
But I mean, somebody that's because of this remote learning and we have teachers coming to school, can they bring their dog, their shepherd or Labrador or? No. Well, I'm just asking.
No.
We've allowed it a couple times, just that we've allowed teachers when we had a big power outage. We had a teacher request to bring their pet with them to work, and we did permit that.
Okay, so we have had animals in the school.
We've had requests, and we do it on a case-by-case basis. So I don't want you to think it's never happened, but it has happened.
Okay. But it's not normal policy?
No.
Okay.
Roll call?
Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes.
Mr. Arndt?
Yes?
Mr. Dana?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
And Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to item number 4, discussion of the strategic plan.
Yes, and again, I just left this as a discussion item tonight. I know there's a lot of information in here, and I wanted you to have a chance to look that over. I will open it up for any questions, either that you contact me individually or at our next meeting in January, that if there's questions. It really just provides a little bit of information, and the packet has an overview, which is that page 1 right behind the cover. Talks a little bit about the closure and what that did. It did slow down some of the areas that we were planning to address this year. because of having limited in-person contact time, doing some of the professional development, doing some of the trainings that we had planned, we were very limited with the number of people that we could gather, and didn't want to cause further problems by having various grade levels from different buildings meet. So it did limit some of the plans that we had. The next 3 pages are the goals and strategies. That's the very shortened form for that. And again, that has all the areas: communication, curriculum, instruction, culture and climate, facilities, finance, and technology. So again, that's the very simple form, not the full strategic plan, but it does show you the goals and the strategies for each of the areas. Then the pages that are numbered in the middle, pages 1 to 14, that is the checklist and status update. All of those are either marked that they're in progress and they'll give some information about what's been done in that area, or they'll say that they're not started or not started with a date change. Some of the ones that we're looking at a date change, we may move forward into the next year to give more time for some of those things to occur. Some of them were already scheduled to maybe be done in year 2 or 3. So again, you'll see that as you go through. And then the final 3 pages are the update on the technology plan. All the yellow highlighted areas were completed areas. And you'll note that there's a great deal that's marked in yellow, as you're well aware from the board, as we made a change to online and remote instruction. We fast forwarded in some of the areas of technology, purchasing additional Chromebooks, purchasing Promethean boards, updating some of the servers and power supplies that were needed, so that we were as prepared as we could be at this time to go into our new plan. And you'll see some other notes that are shared by Mr. Burgard as part of that technology plan there on the very end, talking about some of the end of life and how our rotation for Chromebooks will have to go as we move forward. As you might remember when we talked a little bit about end of life, not that those Chromebooks would not be usable for many of our applications, they would not be usable for testing. So any of the testing that would be done in the state of Ohio, at a certain point after those 6 years, they no longer would be viable as units to be used for testing. So that's the reason for the end of life schedule that's part of that document. If there were questions right now, I'd be glad to answer. Otherwise, I wanted you to have a chance to look this document over. I think it gives a pretty thorough overview of where we are right now as part of the strategic plan, knowing that the past 10 months, we've made a lot of changes, adapted our plans, adapted how school was being conducted, which changed many of the ways that we could interact with our own staff within buildings. So I do want you to have a chance to look that over. And again, if there's questions that you have, individual questions, please feel free to contact me. Otherwise, I will address that in our next meeting in January of 2021.
Thank you for this. This is excellent. A very nice summary of where we've come with the strategic plan. So thank you.
You're welcome.
That brings us to discussion of the revised school plan for January 21.
Yes, I provided 2 things to you. The first one says remote education, December of 2020. And I just want to kind of go through, I'm not going to go through all the details of this, and you might have had a chance to look at this briefly. But the first thing I want to mention is technology. We've had that question come up about technology, Chromebooks. We have distributed Chromebooks to every family that needed a Chromebook, a device, as we went into our remote learning, or our online learning, students that chose online learning. And I'm not going to touch on that for all the schools, but I did note, like at the high school, they gave 220 devices out. At the middle school, they gave 213 devices out. The only issue that we're still facing is we do have some families that have multiple students that are school age in different schools. In most of those families, we were able to at least give them 2 devices, but that does contribute to some of the issues that we're having sometimes with multiple students being on for classes all at one time. So we're trying to adjust as much as we can to that. As we receive our new devices, we're going to try to get those out to those families that need additional devices in their own families if they have multiple students as quickly as we can. We also have been able to get hotspots out. I think we have about 35 that have been distributed. So any student that had requested or family had requested a hotspot, I think between 30 to 35 have been passed out. We do have additional hotspots, so we've reached out to some families if there is a need that we can provide that hotspot to them, again, to assist in the remote education. We purchased 50 hotspots, and we did also set up other public Wi-Fi areas in the district that expanded some of the parking areas and areas around buildings that will be giving out additional information to those students if there's a need. But right now, we haven't seen the need, even with the hotspots that we purchased. The items that I want to cover real quick is, number 1, teachers, administrators, staff members, and some of the other resources that we have in the district have taken a very strong stance and step forward to try to make sure that we're contacting families for students that we're not seeing get on to class, completing work in class, and there was a lot of follow-up in all of the buildings, especially here after the interim period. Right now, you can see that the high school, they had 201 students that have 1 or 2 failing grades at the interim, the 9-week period, about 30% of their enrollment. They've reached out to all those students. Some parents weren't aware that the child was not at the high school level. The student was not getting on, was not completing some of the work. So we're hoping that the personal contact will encourage some of those students to start finishing some of the work and making sure that they're on. We had 42 students, 3 or more failing grades at the interim period. Again, those students were followed up with, and since the process of following up with those students and families, they said they've seen an increase in the number of assignments and students that are getting on to Zoom sessions. There also were letters sent to our students that hold work permits because there's requirements that they need to maintain their school grades, saying, you know, this is a priority for you. You need to make sure that you're keeping up with your school. We understand that many of you are working during this time, some of them working to help out families, but again, this is a priority for you. At the middle school, same type of information. They had about 42% that were failing 1 or more of the core classes, 83 students that were failing 3 or more core classes. Again, the same communication was done. They contacted by phone, email, personal visits. Our SRO, Officer Cooper, and our community liaison that we hired this year, Mr. Mattoon, have been personally going out to homes along with our high school guidance counselors to follow up with students that they haven't been able to reach, students that they haven't had contact with. So again, going out to homes, making sure that the student's all right, trying to find out why they're not getting onto Zoom. And again, there's a variety of reasons that are being given, and making sure that we can locate all of our students. Some students during this time of the pandemic, where they normally would live, are currently not living in that same location. They went to a relative's house that's not in the area, so they may be trying to connect from there, or they're staying with a friend, or they're staying in another area. So again, we've done a lot of investigation over this period of time to try to track down these students. The last sheets that you have, there is an individual sheet for each of the elementary buildings. I did want to note just a couple details from each of those. Again, with Ostenburg, you can see that the majority of students are attending the virtual lessons, are completing work, but you can see in grade 3, there were a number of students, 10 out of the 39 that are in that 3rd grade, that were missing work, about 26%. You can also see grade 5 was the one that caught my attention the most. There were 35 students there. We had about 12 students, 35%, that were not attending their virtual lessons, and again, about 6 students out of those 35 that were failing courses. So again, teachers have been following up, the administration has been following up to try to make sure that students are doing what they're supposed to on the virtual learning. At Geneva, Platt, Spencer, they broke it down even a little bit more, especially as you got to the 4th and 5th grade levels. You can see that some of the breakdowns, especially for 2nd and 3rd grade, where there's a number of students, 14 in 2nd grade, 13 in 3rd grade, out of about 70 to 74 students that were not attending the virtual lessons. And again, some of those failing grades because of students not joining those lessons or falling behind and not keeping up with the work. And then in 4th and 5th grade, you can see some of the breakdown for our student enrollment. For 4th grade, 67 students, and they broke it down by subject areas for math, English, language arts, and science social studies, showing how many were not attending the virtual lessons, excuse me, how many were missing work, and how many were failing because of work that they have not completed. So you can see that for both 4th and 5th grade. 5th grade seemed to be the highest out of those, where you saw a large number of students that weren't getting on, especially for some of the subject areas like math. 24 of the 78 students that just were not getting on for math, and which resulted in a high number of students that were failing in that area. So again, the follow-up has been crucial. That's what's been being done over the last few weeks to make sure that we're following up with those students so that they are getting on their virtual lessons. And then the last one was Cork. They broke it down even a little differently in that they gave you a little bit more information. You can see that the few that I marked, again, 3rd and 4th grade seem to be their highest numbers of students that were not, they broke down a column of students not using teacher office hours. That's one of the things that the elementary has done, where they have a set block of time that are the office hours for the teachers for individual help, so that students can jump onto the Zoom if they're having questions, that the teachers are available to them, which is a little more for the elementary level. But you can see a number of students, another column, were students that were only turning in partial work. And that was anywhere from 1st through 5th grade. And you kind of had ranges that went from 33 to 50% of the students that were only turning in partial work that was assigned or required. And then they also added a column in that very end that talked about some of the teacher concessions that they're making. A lot of that is handing in work at a later period of time, allowing more time for some of the work that's being done. If teachers were not allowing some of the concessions for late work, some of those requirements, you can see that you would have a much higher percent that would be failing some of those classes. So I wanted to share this information. I did also give a copy to the principals if there were any questions that were directly related to one of the buildings. I told them to make sure that they were ready for maybe a possible question that might be asked by the board. But I wanted to share a little bit of information about that. And we could take questions on that first before I talk a little bit about our return to school plan.
Well, I don't have a question, but I have kudos to my teachers. Joseph and Jocelyn's teachers have been phenomenal. So kudos to GPS.
So, yeah, I just wanted to say, I appreciate these statistics. I so much appreciate these statistics and the data. I think from, a board level, we will get, like the third grade, reading guarantee, and we'll sort of get how our kids are doing on graduation rates and how they're doing on standardized testing. But I love this here about how it is divided per grade and also even, per subject. Because, from knowing then, this is something that I hope survives COVID. As far as information that we're provided here in the future, of being able to know, where are the problem areas? Which grade is it at? Which particular subjects? This is fantastic. And so kudos here to the teachers and the administrators and staff for coming up with this here and having a means here where we can actually follow up and find out, what is occurring in this particular child's life here that's maybe, causing some academic distress. So fantastic. Love this. Thank you.
I won't talk about the elementary schools. That's a completely different picture. But when I look at the high school and Geneva Middle School, the high school, 95 follow-up students for habitual absences. 201 students, 1 or 2 failing grades at the intern period. 42 students, 3 or more failing grades. This is the future of our country. And we can't even get them to do their homework at home or sign on a computer. Those students are old enough that they don't need to be babysat at home. But they're not doing the work, and that is our future. So I would ask, what are we doing? Geneva Middle School. 85 to 115 students absent daily, and someone's going to tell me that remote learning works. Comparison to December 2019, only 60 students, about double. 3 students we haven't been able to reach. Are they missing? 83 students failing 3 or more classes. I mean, is this 8th graders before they go to the high school? Is this 6th graders just going in? 235 students failing 1 or more of 6 core classes out of 553. This is unbelievable. This paints a picture, and we're at. Someone's going to say that distant learning and remote learning works.
No, what this is saying is that those children are being held to a higher level than what they should be. This is saying their parents have to work, they're being left at home to their own demise, and they don't have adult supervision, and the teachers can't physically go make them attend, and that's what this is saying.
I understand that, Mrs. President, if we were dealing with elementary, but these are middle school and high school students.
But middle schoolers, although they're at a certain age, but they're not at the maturity level that they should be at to be able to be responsible to do this. Unfortunately, it's just the times. They're not.
All the more reason for them to be in the classroom.
I totally agree with you.
And that's the point I'm trying to give out here.
I don't disagree with you. I wish they were in the classroom.
I personally, my personal thought is I am failing as a board member because our students are not being taught the way they should be taught. And no matter, we're struggling. I understand our teachers are working hard. I understand they're putting everything they can into it. I understand they're making concessions. But this indicates right here that it does not work. Online learning does not work with a young person. The numbers don't lie.
I think what it indicates, and I don't disagree, I would love to see them back in school, and I think in person, you can't replace in-person time, but I think what it indicates is online or remote learning does not work for everyone. We've had students that have been very successful. Some of those students have had probably more support at home. Some of those students are more mature students. have those organizational skills, that they'll make sure that they get assignments done, that they get on to Zoom, that for some of them, they enjoy that type of learning. That's why sometimes we lose students to some of the charter schools, because there are students that like that type of learning, that model. But when you take the full group, some that need that personalized attention, some that need that in-person connection, that's a big part of their life or their routine. No, it has not been successful for them, and that's why a lot of this additional follow-up is necessary. Any other questions on that before I just talk a little bit about our return plan?
And I will just say this, I will be curious about what the statistics show, in the future, going forward, from this date here forward, because we do have a situation here where administrators, staff, teachers are reaching out to these kids. And I think it was, relayed that some of these parents didn't even know that this was what was going on with their child. So I think this gets down to that partnership here between child, parent, teachers here, everyone plays their role here in making sure that a child gets a proper education. So, I think what we've done well here in the second go-around of remote learning that maybe wasn't the case before is, we had a chance here from which to get, a plan more in place. And I think what our teachers and staff and administrators have done here as far as, communicating with parents, communicating with students, I think has been commendable. Is it perfect? And would we all like our kids to be back into an in-person, in-class setting? Clearly, that's the case. But what we're trying to do here is make the best out of a very, very difficult situation. And I just want to say, for one, this is one thing that I love having this snapshot presented here to us on more of a regular basis. So that way we do have a better idea of where resources need to go, grade levels, and particular classes. That's fantastic. And that's something that needs to continue as we go forward.
And the only other thing that I would add to that is, under GMS, they talked about the amount of students absent daily, and then they gave the comparison to last year at the same time. I think that would be valuable information too, because we're getting upset, rightfully so, that some of these numbers are pretty high. The 235 failing one or more of the 6 core classes out of 553. Well, what would have that number been last December? I don't know. I don't know how to compare that. Maybe the number last December was 180. So I think having the comparison there to show the difference between in-school learning and remote learning would give us a little bit more, information and let us gauge our reaction a little bit better.
I'll make sure that there's follow-up information as we can move forward.
Thank you.
The second part of this is talking a little bit about the return to school plan, and I did mention that and shared this in your packet, but I did make a few updates. Current data, again, I'm on the county call every week to kind of see where our current data is, and I also included as part of this the data that I have submitted to the health department for the number of student cases or staff cases that we've had over the varying weeks. Those are positive cases that we had within the district. Cases for this week were up in the county by 431, looking at 3,628. Again, the positivity rate dropped a little bit from last week. Actually, it dropped about 3.4% to 20.3. Positivity rate dropped slightly for UH Hospital in Geneva to 21.1%. And then again, most of the exposure is in non-congregate settings, the community settings, which is at 86.9, where congregate is only at 13.1. So those are kind of the updated statistics. I did not provide, or when I provided those before, I did not have those for this week. Again, some real concerns still with the health department. They are extending the stay-at-home recommendation that they have made, all the county health departments have made. They're extending that to January 2nd of 2021. And most of you are probably aware of the governor talking about the next 21 days and his Stay Safe Ohio protocols that he put into place, again, through January 2nd of 2021. I did not change my recommendation from last time we met. I had looked at one point of possibly bringing back at least maybe the elementary students in this few-week period prior to the winter break, but decided against that. I still am looking at a return of January 11th, Monday, January 11th, for students coming back in a 4-day in-person session, the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, with again keeping the Wednesday as our support and remote day. The only additional details that I added as part of the plan is we did begin to allow some of our athletic teams, and again, most of those teams are already kind of in their own bubble in that it's the same group of students. As we started looking at their ability to start at least conditioning a little bit, so that if there is the possibility of getting back to competition as we start the new year, that they at least have had a chance to condition, they at least would be ready and wouldn't have to spend 2 or 3 weeks then preparing. Coaches are going through very strict protocols, making sure that they check temperature, making sure that they are letting athletes know that it's dependent on them if they're not feeling well, if they're showing symptoms, to stay home, because if teams are impacted, it would close down the activity. So again, I think the coaches are sharing that message as they start to condition, at least stay active during this period of time. The last part of that, excuse me, is the breakfast and lunch. The breakfast and lunch program. Again, we continue to distribute breakfast and lunch and continue to share that this is a free program for anyone ages 1 to 18, whether they're enrolled in our district or not. We did have pre-orders today that were due for anyone that wanted breakfast and lunch for all 5 days next week, the 21st through the 25th. So that was offered to students and families in the district so they could pick those up. They have different cereals for 5 days along with 5 different lunches. And again, we continue to try to promote this and get meals out to our students as part of the closure and the remote period that we're in. Numbers have been very good overall. Again, we're always looking to try to add to those numbers. So again, trying to do as much promotion as we can through our community newsletter that we do a collaboration with UH, through the Gazette, through the Star Beacon, through various robocalls, again, to try to promote this as much as we can. So those are the only 2 additional items that I added, but again, with the emphasis on returning January 11th to a 4-day in-person week, which I think everyone will be glad to see when we're back in person, and hopefully we see a very calm period here during the holiday session, that we don't see an explosion in additional cases, although that's still expected, but hopefully we're going to be able to get back in person time and have the students right in front of us in our classroom.
So questions I have, that is, January 11th is before we're scheduled to have our next board meeting. So at our last board meeting, we were seeking our advice as far as whether or not we should be open or not open. My question here is, you said your strong desire from which to open Monday, January 11th. I think since you brought this stuff us last month, and my question is do you feel you have the authority, if you felt the procedures were in place that you needed to extend the online learning, what would that look like, or what reasons would there have to be for you to decide to extend that January 11th date? And are you going to, again, seek board approval of that ahead of time?
I think with your prior motion that you made, granting the superintendent the authority to make that decision if changes happen, I would use that decision-making authority if necessary to change this plan. The only reason that I can see us not coming back on January 11th is that we see just an explosion in the number of cases that are in the county. We get a recommendation from the Ashtabula County Health Department saying it would be best if you can stay in a remote setting to help to eliminate some of that exposure, or we get some type of order that's coming through the Ohio Department of Health or through the governor's office. Those would be the only reasons that I would look to alter this plan. I think the plan has put in time frames that allow the normal, a normal period of time, that 10-day period between when potential exposures could happen because of the gatherings of families, other gatherings that may be occurring during this break period. I think it provides enough time, and right now the health department feels pretty confident by the 11th we should be able to return to an in-person setting. Again, with all the restrictions and safety guidelines that we had in place prior to our remote learning.
And what are other districts in the county doing? Is this the same thing that they're following by and large, or not?
I think everyone is returning the 11th, except for I saw PV was planning to come back on January 4th with the students that they had, so right after the new year. They're planning to come back on the 4th and in-person instruction. Everywhere else, I think, is on the 11th as a return date.
And that includes ATEC. I'm always concerned about the busing situation, or as well, increased costs. So
I'm not sure with ATEC. I know they had come back for some days here prior to the winter break. They might be planning to come back on the 4th. With our busing, we've been running our buses still for ATEC and St. John if they've been open. So we have had transportation available.
okay.
St. John was remote, weren't they?
They were remote for a period of time, but they did come back for some in-person just prior to the winter break, the holiday break.
Can I ask kind of a follow-up to the email that I had sent you about the Board of Health getting us some information? With these numbers that you provided to us, these are your numbers that some of them have come from the Ashtabula County Department of Health, like I'm assuming like the September, October, November timeframe. But as I started to get behind, are those December numbers ones that you provided to them, or are they providing numbers to us again?
No, that's one discussion that I did have with the health department. Right now that we're in remote, we've only had 2 student cases that have been reported to us and 1 staff case. Since we've been remote, we haven't been in session. We have not received any additional reports from the health department for any students that are current Geneva students. And I had asked the health department, did they want us to reach out to families to see if we wanted to try to encourage them if there were students that were tested and were positive cases that they would report back to the school, so at least we had that information. They were not concerned that we received that information. If they received it, they would try to let us know and try to update us as much as they can, but I know they're still backlogged in some of the information reporting that they're doing. So right now, if there's students that have been home, now again, many of those students, if they're sick and parents knowing that they're not going into school, they may not take them for testing. They may just, again, have the student rest, make sure they're getting plenty of fluids, doing the normal things to take care of them, but they may not take them for testing because they're not attending school. So they may or may not be a positive case. We wouldn't know that unless they do take them to test. Any other questions that I can answer?
That brings us to item number 6. I recommend approval of the appropriations as presented for the fiscal year 2021 to be considered permanent appropriations upon receipt of the certificate of the county auditor that the total appropriations from each fund do not exceed the official estimate of resources. General fund appropriations are approved by the second digit of function and the first digit of object. All other appropriations are approved by fund.
I'll move.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Arndt?
Yes.
Mr. Dana?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
And Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes. Item number 7, I recommend the following personnel actions for the 2021 contract year.
I'll move.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Dana?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes.
And Mr. Arndt?
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to item number 8. We need to determine a time, date, and place for the 21 organizational meeting and a president pro tempore for the organizational meeting.
I know in the past, we've looked at that first Wednesday in January, which would be Wednesday, January 6th, 2021. We've had a 5:30 PM start time. I'm just suggesting this to the board. And in the past, we've used my office. Due to the restrictions and close proximity that we would have to be placed in my office, I would suggest that we meet here at the high school. I could determine a location that we would have plenty of room to spread out, either the study hall area or some other area in the building for that meeting.
I cannot make the first Wednesday. I will be here, but I will be at another meeting.
What time could you make on the 6th?
I can do any other day that week. I can do the second Wednesday.
Okay. How would everyone's schedule look like on the 5th of January, that Tuesday?
Which one, Richard?
The 5th of
The
January.
5th, he was looking at the Tuesday.
I'm good.
That works.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, I would make a motion that we have our organizational meeting on Tuesday, January 5th, starting at 5:30 PM at the high school. And I would also appoint as President Pro Tem, Ms. Fisher for purposes of that organizational meeting. I'll take a second.
January 5th at 5:30 here, and Ms. Fisher as President Pro Tem. We just need a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
Ms. Fisher?
Abstain.
Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes.
Mr. Arndt?
Yes.
And Mr. Dana?
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to other and Mrs. Metzler's visit to GHS.
Yes. When I thought all hope was lost, that I wasn't going to make it to all the schools this year, Mr. Weatherholt invited me to come to the high school, and we worked that out so that I went to the high school the first week in December on the 3rd, and I spent the morning up here at the high school kind of getting, I'll call it a more behind-the-scenes look at what's going on, as opposed to being in the schools when the students were in the schools. For the other 4, this was a case where I was in the school on a teaching day, but obviously without the students. So I started out the day by meeting with Mr. Weatherholt and kind of just discussing some of the ways that the teachers were adapting, the students were adapting. I talked a lot with him about what Mr. Kujala talked about the SRO and the counselors having to go out and kind of make the contact with the students. I guess I really didn't realize that that was happening until him and I spoke, and I was pretty impressed with that. That's a lot of work for our school counselors and our SRO to do. But when I talked to the school counselors a little bit later that morning, they mentioned how the parents really appreciated that contact. So we've talked about that tonight, but I got that from Mr. Weatherholt also. And that there weren't as many kids missing consistently as there were in the spring when things were maybe not quite as organized and routined and regimented. There's been a lot of improvement in that. Even though the numbers may not be where we want them to be for attendance, there was a lot of improvement from spring. The teachers are doing better with technology than they were in the spring. So I think, the overall conversation when I first got to the school was all very positive. These are the things that we've made changes to. This is how we're, progressing. And I did have a chance to kind of walk all the halls. I stopped in to 6 different teachers in different courses, had a chance to talk to them. And each one of them I asked, what's your participation like with the kids on Zoom? How is that going? And they all mentioned that there was an increase in the attendance on their Zoom meetings over last spring, which I guess is to be expected. That's what we hoped for. It didn't necessarily mean that that was going to happen, but it is. So I think everybody that I talked to, with the exception of one of the teachers, mentioned that there was a lot of interaction. There was good attendance in those Zoom meetings. And all the teachers seemed to be much more confident in their ability to use the platforms that they're using, particularly Zoom and Google Classroom. So, that's quite an improvement from the springtime as well. And while it's still not perfect and there's a lot of room for improvement even so going forward, they all pretty much acknowledge that we've got a better handle on teaching and that the students are adapting and they are learning. So, while we see these numbers and we appreciate the numbers that the schools have given us, and Mr. Kujala has provided to us, there are still a lot of students, and I don't want to overlook that are still adapting to this learning environment and doing very well. Despite whether they want to or not, they have that kind of mentality that this is school and this is what they've got to do. And some of the teachers even mentioned to me that, some of the kids that aren't attending would be the kids that they have problems with if they were in school full time, if this were a regular year. Some of these same students are the ones that our counselors are having to go out and try and investigate. So it's not all bad. I was actually very pleasantly surprised at the amount of good I heard from our teachers. And, just how much they really thought that the kids were trying to excel at this learning environment. And then I spoke with the counselors, and one of the counselors mentioned that the concern was that they had were for the students that needed the mental support and not being in person. And, all of this is meant to be an eye-opener for me and kind of understand what some of the challenges are to their days. And I hadn't really thought about that, but it is. And that is one of the detriments to having kids not in school, is that those kids that need different type of support from our counselors may not be getting it as readily. But she also mentioned how they've grown accustomed to emailing her for different things. And that's a regular source of communication. So they were all making that effort when they needed the counselors to email. So that was another positive. So in follow-up, after all of my visits through the school, I sat back down with Mr. Weatherholt, and I think the takeaways, as I've mentioned a couple of times, are just there's been a lot of improvement, but they are reassessing every day, every week, every month going forward, trying to make a plan for the rest of this year and even into next year, because as much as we want it to be normal, I think we have to have that plan that it won't be, and that all of the teachers are in agreement, as we all are, that we want our kids to be in school, but we want them to be in school safely, and that is the goal. So, and that this remote learning is a little bit easier to handle when it's on the bell schedule, as it is right now. So it's not as difficult maybe as people expected it to be. So those are the real takeaways from it. And again, I appreciate being invited to all of the schools this year. It was a real good education for me to see what's happening every day, and I look forward to continuing it into next year as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to add something here to that. And I noticed that the person who gave that report is wearing their mask that says 2020, stink, stunk. But which we all agree. But, during this holiday season, I think it is important for us to just reflect and look upon about really how blessed that we are. And I saw a documentary about the Tampa Bay school system, that when they came back this season after being closed for a period of time for COVID from last season, they had lost track of 7,000 students. So, Eric, when you're thinking about retirement, if you had that, you would have been like, I'm out of here already, right? But imagine that, 7,000 students that they had lost track of at the start of this current, school season. And through their SROs and through, resource officers, they found everyone but 700. Okay, which is and granted, that's a larger school district than us, but still, I don't think that we can lose track of how blessed that we are, and that there are some things that are going to occur based on COVID that are going to make us better. They're going to make us better as far as teachers and administrators and school board members here, and having data here from which to be able to assess things. And I think also to be able to reach out to those that are struggling in finding ways here from which to be able to connect with those students. And so I just wanted to add upon that, what you found out when you went to our high school, and I thank you for that report.
You're welcome.
Okay, that brings us to Mr. Kujal's other.
Yes, I also had a couple items to share for other tonight. First of all, I mentioned this, and some of you may have heard prior to the meeting. Our Chromebooks are being shipped. Again, I did contact CDW, and they heard from Lenovo. There's a shipment of 85,000 units. We are part of that shipment. Our 1,100 Chromebooks are part of that shipment. They should be arriving, they believed, in early to mid-January, and should be to us probably in that mid-January timeframe before they reach the district or are here in the district. So as I'm watching all of these different areas and clinics and hospitals talk about being ready for preparing for the vaccinations, we have a team of experts ready when these Chromebooks arrive so that they can get them out of their boxes and labeled and tagged and get them ready for distribution. So we have a team that's set and ready. So when they do arrive, we're going to try to get those Chromebooks ready to go as quickly as we can. I also want to let the board know that the curtain wall project is complete. The final piece was completed where they had to tie into the brick and the window wall unit. Everything has been water tested and responded perfectly when they did the water testing, so there were no issues. So we're happy to have that project completed, and we're very happy, and I know Mr. Kearns was very happy with the workmanship that he observed, and he was there daily watching and kind of keeping track of everything being done. They had great weather during that time frame that they tried to finish that, so we were happy that that project was completed. The last thing I did provide to you with the information I passed out before the meeting was on GAP, and I provided this title to this group that we're looking at starting. Mrs. Metzler and I were contacted through someone from the city to talk about, would we be interested to at least talk and start discussing some of the gaps that have been created in our community. And it's not just the school. When you looked at what happened here from March 17th to this time, there have been continual changes, closures, delays, cancellations across the board. And these are many opportunities that our students and families look forward to. Even use of the library services that are available, and library will be part of this group. But we're starting with a smaller group, and we're going to look at some of the questions that I addressed there and talk about what can we do as a community as a whole, moving forward. Not just the school district, but what can we do? What resources do we have? what personnel do we have? What can we plan as we move forward? And again, I thought this was a great idea. It starts to look at that everything that has occurred since the closure hasn't just been a school issue. It's been a community issue. And I think as we move forward and things start to open up and programs are starting to become available again, we want to be in the forefront of being able to offer some of these programs. As I had mentioned to the board, some of the student success and wellness funds that we talked about, we had looked at some summer reading programs. But last year we put that on the back burner only because there was some fatigue from parents after being closed since March 17th and having online remote learning basically for the remainder of the year to say, hey, by the way, do you mind if you do a couple more months over the summer with some of the summer reading? That may not have been the opportune time to do that. But this summer may be, depending on what happens here in the next semester. Or if it's not this summer, as we move forward, are there some other activities or projects that we can present and do again as a community? So myself and Mrs. Metzler are going to be part of this initial group. We want to try to set up the agenda. There is one individual from the city, one from the library, another administrator from the district that will be part of this. And then we're looking to add additional people from the township, from other community business partners. We will try to add some personnel from the schools and some other personnel from the city, again, to look at this as a problem that has impacted the entire community.
I have a question. Somebody from the city reached out to you and Mrs. Metzler. Who was that person?
Mr. Griffiths, after he had met with the city council and discussed this as a possibility of starting to look at what the city could do, and opened it up to the school, library, and some other community partners.
I will discuss my concerns with that at a later time.
And that concludes my other for this evening.
Thank you. That takes us to item number 11. I recommend the board hold an executive session to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official.
I'll move.
Second.
Thank you for attending tonight. We will not be returning for any action after the meeting. Have a great night and a safe one.
We still need to
Take a roll
vote.
call.
Oh, roll call.
Mrs. Metzler?
Yes.
Mrs. Ortiz?
Yes.
Mr. Arndt?
Yes?
Mr. Dana?
Yes.
And Ms. Fisher?
Yes.